I first want to thank the conference organizers for providing the space, the opportunity, and for gathering all of us here to have this opportunity to dialogue about critical issues in this context of crisis. So thank you. On August 31st, 2010, President Barack Obama, in a primetime address from the Oval Office, declared that he was going to remove nearly 100,000 U.S. troops from Iraq. He said, "Today old adversaries are at peace and emerging democracies are potential partners. New markets for our goods stretch from Asia to the Americas." The U.S. invasion was not about competition among rival nation states, nor about resurrecting the U.S. empire, as it cannot be understood through outdated nation-state-centric analyses, as we talked about earlier this morning in the keynote. Instead, the invasion sought to violently integrate Iraq into the emergent global economy, and the U.S. states acted on behalf of the transnational capital. The occupation aimed at laying the foundation for a neoliberal state and bolstering an emerging transnationally oriented elite in Iraq. At that point, the occupation relinquished control and let Iraq follow the course of capitalist globalization on autopilot, that is, irrespective of American presence. Central to this aim, then, was the development of the legal framework and the institutional structures that would not only lock in place this integration, but buffer it from political, religious, and cultural struggles. I want to do two things in this presentation. The first is to lay out briefly how the occupation and invasion of the United States was an attempt to integrate Iraq into the global economy, benefiting not the U.S. economy per se, but the global economy in general. And the second is to show how the very act of transnational integration built a neoliberal historic bloc in Iraq that was successful in achieving neoliberal hegemony and ensuring that the project of integration, and this is the key point, became an indigenous Iraqi project whose maintenance was independent of U.S. presence in Iraq. I will spend most of my time talking about the second thesis, or the second theme, because I think the political stakes in this conversation and in the Iraqi state are really in the second theme. So, the U.S. occupiers formally integrated Iraq into the global economy by rewriting its legal framework. The United States and its coalition partners had total and absolute power in Iraq from the time that they overthrew Saddam Hussein's government until June 28, 2004, when the Coalition Provisional Authority, or the CPA as I'm going to refer to it from now on, was dissolved and sovereignty formally transferred to the Iraqi transitional government. During this period, the U.S. administration, through its presidential envoy Paul Bremer, abolished outright the legal system of previous Iraqi states and enacted an entirely new legal structure, including a transitional constitution, 100 orders, and 12 regulations. These laws legally opened Iraq to transnational businesses without prejudice and without favoring businesses from the countries that led the invasion itself. Among Bremer's 100 orders were those pertaining to free trade, privatization and deregulation, imposition of patent, trademark policies, and other intellectual property regimes, opening Iraq to influence of international financial institutions, the opening of Iraq to foreign investment, and the creation of financial markets within Iraq. So I'm going to give you some specific examples, but these are just very few because we don't have that much time. But they will point out this pattern to an almost ridiculously redundant fashion. The Order 12 suspended all tariffs, customs duties, and import taxes. Order 54 said that there shall be no restriction as to the kind and origin of products that could come in and out of Iraq. These two combined, what they did was erase any of the manufacturing that was occurring in Iraq at that time and undermine the nationally oriented economy within Iraq. Order 87 allowed foreign contractors to compete with Iraqis for publicly financed jobs, even if there were Iraqis who could do this at the same time. Order 76 privatized state-owned enterprises. There were over 200 of them, employing around 500,000 Iraqis, second only to the Iraqi state. They just, in the signature in one day of Paul Bremer, erased all of that.
Order 81 said that farmers should be prohibited from reusing seeds of protected varieties. And so in a sense, again, under one signature from Paul Bremer, what it did was, because the Iraqi seed banks were destroyed in the invasion, this law became very significant, changing overnight the most sustainable Iraqi sector that has fed Iraq since biblical times to a highly dependent business ripe for corporate exploitation. Order 39 allowed business investors to have the same right as Iraqi investors. They could invest anywhere, they could take out money at any time. Order 49 decreased taxes on foreign companies from 40% to 15%. And Order 94 allowed Iraqi banks to enter into the financial markets and provide securities. Like I said, I could provide you with many more examples of the laws that the CPA put in and the agreements that the CPA entered into that did the same thing of integrating Iraq into the global economy. But perhaps the best summary of this strategy was articulated by The Economist, which was quite frank in its assessment. And because I know many of you here are enthusiasts of The Economist magazine, I figured I would talk about it. They said in a 2003 article that a shock program of economic reforms signals a radical departure for Iraq. The changes could see its battered economy transformed abruptly into a virtual free trade zone. If carried through, the measures will represent the kind of wish list that foreign investors, not American investors, will represent that foreign investors and donor agencies dream of for developing countries. Investors in any field, except for the oil and refining, will be allowed 100% ownership of the Iraqi assets, full repatriation of profits, and equal legal standings with local firms. Foreign banks will be welcome to set up shop immediately or buy into Iraqi ventures. So consider, at a time when violence was escalating in Iraq, we're talking about 2003, 2004, when social services were in complete disarray, they still remain completely in disarray, infrastructure crippled, reconstruction projects stalled, and masses of Iraqis demanding political sovereignty, Bremer's laws made up a shock program of economic reforms that laid down the legal foundations for the new Iraqi government. It was as if the CPA and the American administrations knew that they only had a limited time frame to erect the legal scaffolding for a neoliberal republic before they had to hand it over to the Iraqis. So the immediate implementation, rather than a long-term process of global integration, effectively acted as a stun gun to bring what was left of Iraq's pre-invasion economy to a standstill. And thus, it did two things simultaneously. It crafted a neoliberal republic, a government whose institutional foundations were based on neoliberal ideology and policies. And then the second thing it did was that those policies shattered the nationally oriented economy of Iraq, and all those who were dependent on that economy were undermined, whether they were workers or whether they were the owners of means of production and their allied strata. So, having shown that the main aim of the occupation, and I could go into it more if you're still not convinced, of the Iraqi state was to integrate it into the global capitalist fold, the question still remains. Why did the Iraqi government leave in place what the Americans had established once they got power? Many are quick to respond to that question that the Iraqi government was simply a puppet regime. They were puppets, comprador elites, or many of these types of characterizations. I would argue that these characterizations are too simple and draw our attention away from the political and class dynamics on the one hand and the strategy of neoliberal development on the other hand. It really is the combination of these two factors that was fertile ground for the emergence of a neoliberal historic bloc, a coming together of an unlikely alliance of actors who pushed for neoliberalism and global integration. The neoliberal project championed by the occupation forces created an opening for a set of social and political actors to identify their own interests with the project of neoliberal hegemony and thus to assume it as their own, make it indigenous to Iraq. So there were two factors. My presentation is full of twos today. There were two factors crucial in explaining the adoption of neoliberal policies by the incoming Iraqi government.